Today on The Occult Detective, we're going to revisit Little Pipe Creek Cemetery. This year marks the 50th anniversary of my first steps into the paranormal world. I was raised in a lowland fen on the banks of Turkey Creek, 2 miles northwest of Converse, surrounded by ash and pine, fields of corn, beans, hay, and straw. My folks and most of my relatives were born in Arkansas, and they reared me on Ozark ghost stories and legends. My origin story begins more or less at the age of 8. It was 1974. I remember the impact of seeing a double bill at the Marion Air Drive-In Theater, The Legend of Boggy Creek and The Exorcist. I was terrified by both, but ultimately captivated, and it set me firmly on the path already paved by my favorite TV show, Kolchak the Night Stalker. I was dead set on becoming a monster hunter like my hero. I collected UFO magazines and comics and prowled the adult stacks in the Converse Public Library for books with an esoteric edge. Stuff like Dennis Wheatley's The Devil Rides Out, Sybil Leek's Complete Book of Witchcraft, and Gerald Gardner's Witchcraft Today. I carried around Carl Cohen's scholastic book, Earth's Hidden Mysteries, like it was an instruction manual. My friends and I formed the Monster Club, based on The Secret Hideout by John Peterson. We prowled Converse on our bikes, sneaking into abandoned houses and scouring the many local boneyards, and we made exhaustive lists of all manner of ghosts and beasties, culled from novels, comics, TV, movies, and folklore and myth. We all had the bug, but I was even more consumed. My most prized possession, still to this day, had belonged to my great-grandmother. One evening, staying with my paternal grandparents, I was digging through a steamer trunk full of my great-grandmother's things they had stored in a spare upstairs bedroom. Inside was a treasure trove of books on astrology, herbology, and hex signs, but the one item that most caught my imagination, that I could not resist, was a mid-40s edition of Manly Palmer Hall's Unseen Forces. Unseen Forces became my Bible of sorts. The pamphlet revealed to me a world filled with elementals, nature spirits, thought forms, ghosts, specters, and the dweller on the threshold. Everything leading up to my discovery of this book was kindling. Unseen Forces was the spark. The fire came after. We lived, you see, just a quarter mile from one of Miami County's most famous paranormal hotspots, Little Pipe Creek Cemetery. The small cemetery used to be surrounded by a fence with a wide gate in the northwest corner of the lot. Legend held that when people came to visit at night, the gate would open of its own accord for those of the more gentle persuasion. But when a young man would enter, the gate would open, only to swiftly slam shut, striking them. 8-year-old me couldn't resist the temptation of living so close to such a place. Late at night, after my parents were fast asleep, I would scamper up the gravel road to the top of the hill, enter the cemetery, and climb up into the crook of the old shade tree in the center of my favorite boneyard. And there, over the course of several weeks, I watched and waited and called out for a spirit to appear. And when one eventually did, a mist-like female form that drifted out of the southeast corner, my obsession with the paranormal and occult were cemented. I've shared this story many times, but what I don't speak of often is how my mother, after a falling out with hers, moved us from the farm into the nearby town of Converse. Considering I went to school and bought my comics there, you wouldn't think this would be much of an adjustment. Well, you'd be wrong. I hated it. I hated the house we moved into. I hated being away from Turkey Creek and Little Pipe Cemetery. Luckily, moving out was just 4 years away, but I adjusted over time. Still, I resented being taken away from the farm. I loved it in the country, but our new home did have a peculiar charm to it. It was, or is, haunted. I thought maybe it was because of all the renovations required to make the place livable, but there was plenty of activity in that house. mostly of the residual kind, but on occasion, intelligent presences manifested over the years. Night terrors and sleepwalking, things I had grown out of, returned. There were phantom smells, footsteps, and knocks, and little secret rooms hidden in the walls which I made use of. Of course, this was a time when I was experimenting more readily with magic, so I was attracting a certain amount of activity through these studies. I certainly felt something with sinister intent. Overactive imagination? Maybe. Later, I discovered an old map of the town, prior to its name change to Converse. Should I have been surprised to discover that our house was built on the site of a former church and cemetery? Our neighbor had a skeleton in their basement, dug up while doing some excavating, and when you looked out across our yard, you could see the roll of the lawn give up the telltale signs that graves had once littered the landscape. But are you ready for the real kicker? When the cemetery was moved, the bodies, or at least most of them, came to populate a new boneyard. Care to guess what this new cemetery was called? That's right, Little Pipe Creek. The cemetery I grew up with and obsessed over was constructed to give new home to the bodies moved from the house my family had relocated to. Symmetry and synchronicity. As for the house, the intelligent hauntings have seemingly long since passed, though residual activity still occurs there on occasion. It seemed to be rekindled when my father was struggling with cancer from the hospital bed we'd set up in the living room. After he passed, things quieted down again, or so my mother says. Still, sometimes when I visit, when I walk into the rooms I called my own as a teen, I get the sense still that there's something there, watching me, wishing I would lie down to sleep there as I had once done before. Maybe someday I will again, just for old time's sake. Old ghosts can be like old friends, even the ones who mean us harm. And Little Pipe Creek? Well, I still swing by there on occasion. It's changed a lot. The old shade tree is gone, taken away, much like the gate and fence, and the tombstones that littered the place have seen far better days. But I believe the ghosts remain, if not in the proverbial flesh, then in my wildest imaginings. The ghost of Little Pipe Creek was the thing that showed me that what I wanted to be true, that what I believed to be true, was a reality. It was the fire that was set alight, and that still burns 50 years later.